I studied physics and applied math in college, commissioned into the U.S. Army as an infantry officer, and did not do physics and math. Did that for 4 years. Deployed to Kuwait and Afghanistan back in 2016, 17. And then I taught leadership at the Army's Officer Candidate School before getting out. Thought I was going to go do math research or something, but turns out no one really wants to hire you to do math even if you haven't done math for a while. And so I ended up going to get my MBA. Was fortunate Harvard Business School worked out, so I went there. Kind of had a pretty eye-opening 2 years about how kind of the world worked. Realized I didn't want to do any of that. Jumped into startups right at the beginning of COVID. Co-founded. Really, I was like the third Sweat Equity co-founder of an e-commerce software startup, basically helping media publishers like think Old World Media doing website stuff, syndicate a lot of their content, which was a good time to be doing that in COVID. Sprinted on that for about 18 months. We sold that in the end of 2021. After that, I had my fill of that and jumped into what at the time felt like the most fun and chaotic part of the internet, which was, of course, crypto, and kind of been wandering since then. Been doing a lot of stuff. Obviously, discovered Farcaster during that time. Raised some money for my startup at the time, which was via Protocol, now Seymour.tv. And now we're helping creators build their list, which is everybody that they need to know that's engaging with their content and everything that they're putting out into the world.
Have you guys explored, well, so, first of all, thanks for sharing that. And I am curious about a couple things about the earlier part,
For sure.
but maybe we'll go in like reverse order a little bit. So when you talk about, helping creators build their lists, like what is, maybe you could sort of elaborate a little bit more on, first of all, like what that means. And I wonder, just given, sort of your interest in crypto as well, if now or, potentially later, have you considered any part of this sort of strategy involving sort of like crypto, like building sort of like an on-chain audience or identifying your on-chain audience through on-chain activity? Or is it more focused on, for now, like, non-crypto content creation, finding people who are reading your, Substack or listening to your podcast and things like that?
For sure. So the idea of the list kind of comes from my own personal experiences trying to create content both like on Farcaster, other places on the internet, videos. Now also running my own show with a friend of mine, Kristen, called OK Banger. And the thing that we run into the most is that we have a good intuitive sense of who likes our stuff, who shows up to the streams. We're doing some crypto native, community building on there with Pods. Shout out to them, pods.media.
Yeah.
And but like even with all of that, it's too many pieces in too many places for a creator who pretty much all are one person or like really small teams. And frankly, they're busy building or like making the content they're trying to make. And so the vision for like the list is really the vision of taking that part of being a creator that platforms can't take away, which is a group of people that genuinely like you and what you're putting out, and putting that in a spot where you always have it. You don't have to really think about it, and you don't have to do the kind of tidying you have to do with the spreadsheet apparatuses we tend to build up. And so like on-chain data is actually way better for doing this. We're just in that messy middle of, hey, we can see the pieces of like, hey, putting mints out into the world helps you identify people that are, no joke, putting money towards the stuff that you're putting out. But like most people still don't do that. And so, we're integrating Hypersub. We just integrated Icebreaker data with credentials to help creators understand that, like, hey, this person is engaging with your posts on Farcaster. Here's some extra context for them coming from Icebreaker. And so, like, I view on-chain data as where I expect the world to go, or at least in parts. But obviously, we live in a mostly like Web 2 social media economy still.
Right. So you guys are mostly going to cater to sort of taking this really messy set of Web2 data and cleaning it up for the creator, with the idea that eventually this stuff may move towards more on-chain data, which will probably I mean, there'll still be probably value in a service that cleans up the data and presents it in a friendly and easy to read way. But on-chain data should be maybe more naturally clean for the creator to sort of read. That seem roughly like right to what you're saying?
I think the beauty of on-chain data isn't that it's necessarily cleaner, although like the parts that are earlier, it is just by nature cleaner because there's less people, screwing around with it or like
Right.
astroturfing different parts of it. Although that's actually happening a lot, which I'm happy to talk about. The the important part about on-chain data is it can't get taken away from you at a moment's notice, right? And that's kind of the nature of, I mean, we've seen with the Twitter API for anyone that's trying to get useful data from that walled garden. It's just a nightmare. And then all the other platforms have their own API gateways or, this Rube Goldberg machine of individual scraping and third party tool. Like it just sucks, man. And so what we're really trying to do in the near term is to pull out the like 5 to 10% of people that engage with your stuff that like, oh no, this person actually cares about you. They didn't just like see you once and then like something and then move on. And it's sometimes surprisingly hard to tease that information out, not because it's like hidden, but because there's so many bits of information flying at you that you don't realize that, oh, this person showed up to your live show like 10 times in a row and has minted every single show episode. Like that's the kind of stuff that frankly like we're trying to pay attention to it and we're realizing as we dig into the data a little bit more.
So what's an example of like your like right down the middle uh customer or creator, like who is that person, like what are they doing and what are they seeing by using your product?
So right now it's focused on like Farcaster adjacent because frankly it's like the best and highest fidelity data that you can have that we can like pull into. We have to be a little
Right.
bit more creative with Web2 platforms, but our ideal creator is somebody who has committed consistently to making stuff on Farcaster, whether it's like via Hypersub or putting out short form videos or even just casting and trying to nurture a channel. What we're doing for those people is we're pulling out the 10, 20 people that they need to be paying attention to, both in terms of like that person's energy and fervor with engaging with like say their channel for an example, and also identifying people that are like following them, maybe have like replied to posts in a channel that they haven't really realized, but they're an important part of the community. So somebody who might be big or was early to Farcaster that has been engaging with your stuff, but somebody that you could spend a little bit more deliberate time talking to or reaching out to because they've shown a proclivity to like your stuff already.
Right. And then are they able to use that to find like the next segment of people that are like, so is it sort of like, similar audiences sort of thing where you can match, the 20 top people to try to involve and engage more top people who are most likely to enjoy your content? Or what are people doing with this data basically?
Yeah, so right now I'm calling it the gather phase of like you already have these resources within your community that you're not paying as much attention to, perhaps because you're doing the hard work of creating stuff. What you're talking about is like our next phase of it, of identifying the people that like maybe have liked some of your posts and they're, key connectors in the community, but they haven't, followed you or followed your channel yet. So I call that kind of like the hunting phase, which we're going to be leaning into in the next few months.
Got it. And what was I going to say? Is there, you mentioned like sort of this focus on the Farcaster ecosystem to start, first of all, because it's like easier to get the data. But do you have desires to go outside of that near term or long term, or are you really trying to like sort of pair with Farcaster and just grow with Farcaster? Because I feel like, I've been talking to some of these people who are like sort of building businesses that are pretty dependent on Farcaster continuing to grow, significantly into the future. And I feel like some of these people are after, a year plus or so of working on whatever it is that they're working on, they feel like sort of, reducing dependence on Farcaster's growth to sort of make or break their own currently Farcaster dependent business. But I think there's also, a lot to be said for the other side of the argument, which is that, hey, even if Farcaster is, still relatively small today and not guaranteed to continue to grow, those are the types of things that, sort of big rewards require significant risk. And if you're willing to sort of like bet it all on this platform where other companies may be hesitant to do so, then if that bet sort of does work out and Farcaster does turn out to be, for example, like the leading, decentralized social network, then your company's sort of like, assuming that you're doing other things well, you're poised to benefit, more so than others who sort of like hedge their bets. I'm curious where you sort of fall on that spectrum.
So I've been on Farcaster for 2.5 years now. I got in like mid 2022. It's honestly kind of hard to maintain the same level of optimism that I had like a year ago, right? Not because I've lost faith in the Farcaster team. I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better group of builders in general on the internet. Like they're an incredible team and an incredibly well funded team, and so like I have full faith that they will eventually figure something out. But the thing that I'm grappling with is, are they going to figure out something, one, on the timeline that I can survive on, right? Because like I don't have $150 million in my pocket. And
Right.
then I'm also trying to figure out if the thing that they're going to iterate into works with the kind of stuff that I'm building. I still think the answer is broadly yes to the second one, and I don't know to the first one. And so I think we like sometimes get caught up on the will it work conversation when I think it's really like what's the timeline that we think it's going to work. And I the Warpcast team like has 10-year horizon for their journey that they're on, and that's like an incredible thing to be able to have. But it's like a luxury a lot of us don't have. And so I love Farcaster. I love the people on it. And it's still the best place on the internet to get your first 100 users, I think. It's one of those things that once I figure out the core product loop for Seymour that I have a lot of conviction in on it being the thing, I have to look elsewhere because they can't be the bottleneck for my growth, especially for the next raise, which I kind of have to do in the next like 8-9 months. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing with Funkcaster that I've thought about where they have this. I think part of what has made it as successful as it's been to date is the slow, deliberate growth strategy that they have taken from day one, where they were like, individually onboarding every new user, and then it was sort of like referral based only and invite only and whatnot. And like you contrast that with, Friendtech or BitCloud or some of these other social, crypto social experiments. And they've been very fast to grow, but also very fast to fall.
Yep.
And I think that's, partly that's going to be like sort of due to the product, but partly, and just sort of like the nature, like both of those examples I just mentioned were like much more money oriented, which brought a lot of money in, and they were on, bond curves. So then once people started selling, it sort of becomes this like, it just crashes basically.
Yeah.
And they're just, those are, very, I'm interested in those things. I don't know. I didn't really follow up. I mean, both of those things actually, I guess, have been accused of some, less than ethical or legal behavior. And I'm not
Yeah.
sure the merits of either of those because I haven't really dug into them, but I'm aware of them. But regardless, like these sorts of, there's other sort of highly money oriented social experiments that have occurred, whether it's, degen with tipping or, Moxie more recently. And obviously like in Solana world, there's, Pump.Fun, like these social and highly financial things are being experimented with. And it, I'm give the benefit of the doubt to the idea that some of them will work not only short term, but also like persistently. I guess Pump.Fun is maybe one of the earlier examples of something that has persisted longer than some of these other things. But that's
For
like
sure.
that's less social. Even I would say that's like calling that social is kind of a stretch almost.
Yeah,
It's like just a meme coin launcher. But
for sure.
anyway, like these ideas, like they're all like very interesting to me. But I think Farcaster, like from the very early days, was like we're not going to have this like huge growth followed by a huge fall off. We're not going to integrate. We're not going to like sort of make this financial first and foremost from the beginning or anything like that. We're not going to launch a token or anything. And part of what's enabled them to take that approach is, to your point, the fact that they've been extremely well funded, um, from the early days, and then more so even with their latest raise. I forget exactly when that was, but that's I think the $150 million that you're alluding to, or something along those
Yeah,
lines, like some amount like that. And I've thought about like whether, obviously at face value, it's like, yeah, would love $150 million to work on what I want to work on for a long period of time. But I have wondered, like, for the probability of success or various levels of success for the business, like what is that kind of fundraise for a business that doesn't really need that level of funding necessarily, on any short-term horizon at least. With like, I understand like still a pretty lean team that they're working with. Granted, like, people are well paid, but still, it's just like, it's not like they're like launching rockets or something.
for sure.
It's like, just basically paying for people. Maybe there's other costs, but like it's, mostly people, I think. And so it's like, is that amount of money and that length of runway, on the one hand, it would seem helpful that it allows you to do things without necessarily needing an immediate profit, being able to take more of a long-term mindset. It allows you to have that slow and deliberate growth strategy. But on the other hand, there's just naturally got to be a little like you can self-impose a sense of urgency all you want. And some people are maybe better at doing that than others. Some teams are going to be better at doing that than others. Some leaders of teams are going to be better at doing that than others. And Farcaster, for what it's worth, seems, pretty capable of that, with just being able to, ship updates relatively frequently, and not being afraid to make changes and ship things and whatever. But you can't ignore the, the situation, which is that like there is not as much of a financial motivation of urgency. And I wonder if that, at a certain point with a certain runway, that actually can make it like quite difficult to build a successful business. And, if that's the case, also dragging out the realization of that outcome because you have so much time to sort of like play with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of the main question about fundraising rounds, right? And the thing that we've kind of seen happen over the past few years with, the frankly ridiculous evolution of LLMs and their ability to augment teams is kind of this big question of, do you even get this 1,000-person company thing to happen anymore? And so like it makes it even more of a question of like, do you really need $150 million to do the thing that you're trying to do? And so I think of myself honestly a little bit as like a Dan, not acolyte, because I have like plenty of like criticisms of Dan, but like I've studied this dude for 2 years, watching all the stuff that he's been doing on this platform. One, because I just find it interesting, but two, because I think he's frankly really thoughtful. Even if I like disagree with him on some stuff, but like he has a lot more experience of helping build product at scale than I do. So like I should sometimes shut up and pay attention, right? And so some of the things that I think help answer the question is like, it's not just like should you raise $150 million. It's like, who should raise $150 million. I don't think it's, the person that just graduated college and wants to, make a restaurant finding app, like a classic tar pit idea. Like, it's a person that knows how long their journey is going to take. And that's how I think, whether he's right or wrong, that's how I think Dan is actually viewing himself in this like process. I also think it's needs to be raised by somebody who has studied the idea maze of the problem that they're trying to solve. And the idea maze for them is like the landscape of mega social apps. because I think we basically have two scenarios for social apps, which is kind of a misnomer, right? Because social media isn't really social in the way that it used to be. But the landscape of social media apps is either giant mega platforms like Meta and TikTok, or it's really hyper growth. Maybe flash in the pan is too derogatory for what I mean, but like the Nikita Beer style of social experiences. And that is kind of the two that have come out over the past 5 years. And Dan says it all the time, but it took TikTok, a decade and, spending $1 billion to get to where it is today. And I think like that's Dan's mentality with this of raising the 150 million. I don't know if they're going to do another raise, but that is where I think he thinks the puck is going for what they're trying to do.
Right. And I guess the question there is like, okay, benefit of the doubt, you know it's going to take, or at least your thesis is it's going to take 10 years. And it's gonna be really hard. You have to pay people well because you need really talented people, et cetera, et cetera. The question is like, why, from my perspective, like, why do you need to, and I'm not saying it's like wrong, I'm just sort of curious, like, why do you need to raise that much up front to fund that many years versus can you not break that 10 years into various milestones that you should be able to hit in order to justify the next, basically series round. And theoretically, that would be advantageous to the team. If you do believe that you can hit those milestones, that you can raise with less dilution at each of those points because the business is de-risked. But so I guess that's sort of like the question. It's like this doesn't seem like something that needs $150 million in the next 2 or 3 years. But it's reasonable to say that you're raising for 10 years. But then the question is like, okay, well, why not just raise for like 3 years at a time, 3 times over the next 10 years or something like that? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't expect that you necessarily do, but it's just something that I, sort of wonder about. And for what it's worth, like I've been on Farcaster for, I think roughly the same amount of time as you, like late 2022, something like that. And I don't know, I've sort of gone, I wouldn't say that granted, I'm not building a business dependent on Farcaster, and I totally understand, what you said about like, you can believe in Farcaster long-term, and still not want to be dependent on it because the time frame just either won't or might not, match up. You might not be willing to make the bet on the time frame that you're willing to make on the overall success over sort of unlimited time frame. So that makes total sense. But I think also, like, I don't know, I've gone through, like, when I would say roughly my first year on Farcaster, like I liked it. And I recognized there's like a super high quality community, which was like kind of the coolest part. I was like, wow, like the average user here is great. And when I post something, it might get like less likes than Twitter, but it gets like more actual, quality engagement. Like people are actually replying and people are doing so thoughtfully. And like, that's pretty cool. I haven't really been on a social network like that, maybe really ever. And so like, I was like, okay, I really like this. But I was also like, it's pretty hard to like build the habit of like using a new social app regularly. Like if you think about how many times you've actually done that, if you, take out the Nikita Beer style stuff that you mentioned and think about only stuff that's actually persisted in as a habit of yours for like years, there's like only so many of these things. It's like, maybe depending on the person, but it might be like, okay, like Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Warpcast. Like there's not very many of them, and they have to be kind of like huge, or maybe not for everyone, but like a lot of them have been. And Warpcast is actually really the only one that separates from that, equation for me. And that Warpcast is not by any means huge, and yet it has sustained as a social app that I have used regularly for over 2 years. But having said that, at the beginning, I was most like to facilitate that onboarding. Like I had this desire to use it. I liked it. And I was generally like in favor of, I would like to see a, more decentralized, censorship resistant social network come about, especially after, whatever it was, 4 years ago, like Trump being deplatformed. I think there's all this, people make about decentralization. And first of all, I think decentralization is more of a means to an end in most cases than an end in and of itself. And I think
Hmm.
oftentimes that end that it's a means to is um, roughly censorship resistance. And so in the case of social media, like that's certainly the case. Like, why do you need decentralized social? Well, so that the centralized socials can't conspire to, deplatform a sitting president or someone, someone else who's maybe you have a sitting president who is like genuinely evil or something, and then you have the lead of the resistance and they're deplatformed. Like it could go either way, but regardless, like these powerful people with substantial followings being deplatformed, I don't think is good for the world. Like you hear, I guess Elon talks about this, maybe it's someone else, but it's like a good test for these social platforms is like, and like general censorship is, if you're in favor of one rule, like one set of rules, you should be willing to, you should still be in favor of those rules. You should be willing to like put the other side that you're against in charge. Like the rules should be good for that situation as well, not just while your group is in charge, because obviously you're going to be in favor of like, you might be in favor of overly censorship, pro censorship rules while your team is in charge. But then if you wouldn't pass that over with the same rules to the other team, ultimately it's not a good sense of rules because one day, the tables may flip or whatever. And so anyway, I think social, to me, it's like there's some things that people I feel like in crypto these days are making decentralized just for the sake of like putting decentralized in the pitch deck or whatever, or like raising from a crypto fund. But
For
it's like
sure.
unclear as to why it actually benefits from being decentralized. But then there are other things where I think it's very clearly valuable. And so I think, the most obvious one probably is money, which is Bitcoin. Or, if you want to make an argument for other cryptos as well, that's totally fine. I think Bitcoin's just sort of the easiest one to comprehend. It's not trying to
Yeah,
do
no,
anything really
I'm
confusing. It's
generally
just
in
digital
alignment
gold.
on that.
Yeah, it's just digital gold. I mean, because Ethereum, like, I'm totally open to the idea that Ethereum is also a form of money, or even Solana or whatever else you want to say. Um, but Bitcoin is like only that, whereas these other things are that and also other stuff. So um, I think Bitcoin, money is like sort of the first example where it's like, okay, obviously it's not good to have central institutions with the ability to hyperinflate your money away overnight. And we've seen this happen in various countries over history. It's also not good for China to be able to track the subway tickets of people who went to the Hong Kong rallies and turn off their bank accounts. Like these things are not good. You need money to live, and so the ability for a centralized institution to take away your money, whether it's through inflation or outright like seizure or shutting off your bank accounts because they don't like something that you did, is really bad. But second to money, if you care at all about freedom of speech and ability to express yourself and, not have strictly like censored, or centralized sources giving all the information, then that's a super important one as well. And so I think there's a huge case for decentralization. So anyway, when Farcaster first came out, I was like, yeah, I would really like to see something like this succeed. Plus, it's fun. Plus, there's quality engagement. Plus, I'm really early. Plus, I got to speak with the founder, and so that's kind of cool. And like, would like to see him win and the team win, and all of these various reasons I wanted to sort of onboard the habit. And so what I basically did, I was just like sort of cross posting from Twitter for a while, and
Yeah.
then over time, um, like I said, I would get like sort of better replies on Farcaster, so I'd reply to those individually. At least it wasn't like purely a mirror of the content.
Yeah.
And then over time, I was like, you know what? There's actually sort of like, first of all, Farcaster grew to be less of directly a Twitter clone. It had like other interesting things going on, whether it's frames or channels or whatever. And then so now I'm at the point where I'm actually like, this was like took a long time to happen, but now I'm at the point where like a lot of my tweets are cross posted. First of all, they're less than my casts. Second of all, they're cross posted oftentimes from the original cast. And so the model sort of like flipped on its head. And just by that sort of like change in usage over the years, I find myself like more bullish on Farcaster actually.
Hmm.
Just sort of like observing my own behavior. But again, I have no idea if, if I was building a business on it, I don't know, to your point, if I have no bet on timing, because it's just harder. It's hard enough to predict if Farcaster is going to do well generally, but to predict
Yeah.
that it's going to have X number of users, which makes your business viable in 18 months, much harder bet to make with high conviction.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, but like in the scope of all of the things that you got into, because there's a lot. I think one of the things that resonates a lot is the idea of censorship resistance in terms of posting. Like as they like honestly, my ideal, path for Seymour is to find this core product loop that we're trying to discover, and then in 3 to 5 years, be the onboarding, like one-click onboarding spot for traditional Web2 creators to Farcaster. Because the way that we built our infrastructure, we've invested a lot into scraping and ingesting a creator's content from Web2, like holistically. And so we are pretty close to the point where if somebody did and like Farcaster evolved to the point where it natively supported all the types of content, we could just like do that one click onboarding. Because I do think like hubs aren't the same thing as a blockchain, but it's, frankly, a lot closer than we have with Web 2, which by the way, I don't know if you caught this, but Elon Twitter today is still deplatforming people. They deplatformed Khamenei of Iran for posting some threats in Hebrew last week. So it's not solved. And so, whether you agree or not, it's still so silly. But anyway, the like Farcaster could be that spot. But the challenge, which Dan has brought up before, is that no social platform has become a dominant platform without introducing a new social primitive. And a lot of times that primitive starts as like a tool. uh, YouTube let you host videos for the first time. Instagram was like, frankly, the first holistic photo editor on your phone. Snapchat's obviously disappearing photos, and then TikTok is short form video editor on your phone as well. Like, none of these things happened in like without the core primitive it enabled. And like, I think a lot. I mean, like between you and me, I think Dan and the team raised 150 million because they could. Like, period, full stop. It was like an opportunity that they saw that they could have with how the market was going at the moment, like their relationship to the fund that invested with them. Like, I just think they could make it happen, and I don't think a lot of teams could replicate that. But in addition to that, I think he sees what an uphill fight it is to discover in a grassroots way a new social primitive, and that's like really what they're looking for. They thought it was channels, and I don't think they believe that anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned like each new social, big successful social app having this sort of new thing where like, just being a crypto Twitter or something, or crypto something similar to Twitter isn't sort of enough. You actually need to win on the fully different thing that crypto needs to sort of be like an independent, you know, aspect of that. Uh, and actually, as I'm saying that, I mean, you would think that the thing, like just going and creating this new, like super popular, potentially like better than TikTok social primitive seems like a really hard problem to solve. It's like, why should you be able to go solve it just because you decided you want to go look for that thing? Like tons of other people are trying to do that, etc. It would seem like more likely than not that whatever that thing is going to, I said like independent of crypto, and that like just being a crypto social app is not enough, but
Yep.
not independent in that it should be unrelated, because it probably, if there's going to be something that you find that sort of satisfies that new social primitive that's like sufficiently interesting, more so than other things, or on par with other big social apps, I feel like it probably has to be something that is enabled by crypto, just because that's a much smaller population of founders and companies and people that are, first of all, looking to do that, than the more broader question of like, what's a new interesting social thing? And second of all, because that's probably, first of all, I think that there are, well, I got like first of all, second of all, and then back to first of all. But second of all, because that's where the team has their expertise. And then I guess third of all, because I genuinely think that crypto, like, there's interesting things that have been built. Things take longer than people want. There's Bitcoin, there's Ethereum, there's Solana, there's meme coins, there's USDC. there are NFTs, there's prediction markets. These are all things that like have succeeded in big ways, I would say. And then there's other things that maybe have succeeded in smaller ways, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some things as well. Um, but it seems still that there are interesting things that crypto enables that haven't even really been touched upon yet. And I
Hmm.
personally am like very bullish on, um, bullish might be the wrong word, but I think we have yet to really even peek into what can be cool on the side of like interoperability. And sort of like what we were talking about earlier in terms of like this data, like it's easy for you to accrue this data from, all this on-chain activity. It's a nightmare to go and, for a podcaster, go and figure out, their all the information about their audience on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and these other podcasting apps. And, then how does their Twitter relate to that? And like all the traditional stuff, it's like really hard, if not impossible in some cases, to pull together, and you can't do it, permissionlessly and all of these things. And with crypto, it's just like this thing exists and that thing exists and this other thing exists. And now we can just go pull all of that and like use all of that and build some cool experience with that. And obviously, Farcaster is one thing that starts to show this with people are building, you know, other social apps where you sort of can like, you start on this like Dracula, for example. I haven't really been super active over there, but they're trying to do, Alex Mazmej and his team are trying to do like TikTok, or at least it started as like sort of TikTok on Farcaster. And then, um, now I think they've shifted to something to do with like meme coins involved with videos somehow or something like that. But
Yeah.
regardless, it's like you sign up for the thing, and it's so different than signing up for previous social apps where you just start from scratch. You sign on there, you immediately have all your Farcaster friends. Um, you don't have to start you don't have to build your social reputation from scratch. And that alone, I think, is like a, pretty subtle version of this interoperability thing. But I think there's a lot of other things that can come to be. And so I feel like to the extent that they're going to discover this, gold mine new social primitive, it's probably going to be something that couldn't have been done before crypto. I would be, would be my guess. And the thing that I wonder after hearing you just like quickly describe, Snapchat's thing and Instagram's thing and TikTok's thing, they were all very easy and quick to describe. Um, and so I feel like just sort of, you carry that forward. The next thing, whatever it is that Farcaster describes, or Farcaster discovers, it should also be like sort of similarly easy to describe. And if you just take that as sort of like an assumption, I feel like channels were not like quite as easy to describe. You know what I mean? And I know
Yeah, I agree.
they're trying to change channels as well. And so I don't think they've like completely given up on them. They're trying like maybe sort of like a different version of them. But even, the current version also, I'm not sure how, it's not as easy as disappearing photos and videos, or, photo editor, or short form videos, or microblogging, or any of these things, of the past, social platforms that succeeded. So I don't know, if I knew, if I knew what the answer was, I could maybe go and raise a bunch of money myself, but I don't. But it'll be curious to follow along. And I think the interesting thing to me is that, I've said for, like I said, I've probably been on for 2.5 years now on Farcaster, and probably 6 months in or a year in, I sort of had this realization of like, if they can't like sort of solve what they're going for and like become this absolutely, massive decentralized social network or protocol, I think there's already like enough value here just in the quality of the community and the capabilities of that community were it to be aligned, especially like, crypto very much helps to align people. Just if you get everyone on board with a token or whatever.
Hmm.
Like I feel like there's so much value on Farcaster that even if they sort of fail in their grand mission, they might not, figure out, it might be hard to figure out something that's sort of like worth, the large investment and whatever valuation comes with that they raise that. But like, I think there's a ton of value already in what they would consider to be, I think, something that, I don't think they would consider themselves having succeeded yet. But um, it's a, you and I have both been a part of it for some time. It's a great group of people who are obviously pro crypto. So if you believe crypto is going to continue to do well, then this group is going to, benefit from that. Um, it's definitely like a huge bias towards builders. So
For
I'm
sure.
interested to see where it goes, and if there's even flexibility to their grand mission, if, say 3, 4 years from now, it's, maybe it hasn't grown as much as they had hoped, but the quality remains and some interesting things are going on. Like, I think it's an interesting question what you can do with like if you cut off growth on Farcaster completely today, what could you do? What would you, so the goal is no longer like build a massive decentralized social network.
Hmm.
What could the goal be? Like, what would be an interesting other goal that you could sort of, if you take what you have now and make this sort of unnecessary assumption that, no more growth is allowed, just as an extreme case, like what could they do? I think that's sort of an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, I think without the people that have been on Farcaster, like there's no point to show up, right? Which is kind of just another way of what you're saying. And I almost think of it as like a. Have you ever heard the quote in from the physics world? I forget who said. I looked it up the other day too, but it's like um, new ideas are never embraced by the previous generation. Like the previous generation just dies.
Right.
And sometimes I wonder if that's kind of the problem set that we have in and around crypto Web3, whatever you want to call it, where like you already have examples of people on Farcaster, Afro Chicks. I don't know if you're following her at all, but she's like, you know,
She the Olympics girl?
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And she's like posting her journey on like Web3 social primarily, like earning money from Zora Mints, like no joke, sponsoring herself in a real way with mostly, if not fully on-chain posting in a way that's like frankly unimaginable for, for like not in a derogatory way, but like somebody just starting out on social in Web 2. Like you can't do the same thing. And
Right.
as you get more people that see people like her that are succeeding, like obviously people can't succeed in the exact same way if the audience stays the same and a bunch more creators come on. But I truly believe audiences flow to wherever the content is the best, and audiences get to decide what that is to them. But like for creators, the deal is like infinitely better in an on-chain world. Like all of the things we're talking about as being public goods or community goods in terms of censorship resistance, like owning what gets like put on chain and all that, like it's so much better for creators. And if it didn't have the stink of crypto on it, like people could see that. And like that's why some of the big creators did dip their toe into crypto because they like no joke saw the promise, right? Like they were dealing with their analytics getting rugged by whatever platform they were on and there was nothing they could do about it. And so like I think we probably do hit this I don't know, growth stagnation or keep going sideways for a little bit, but like the more new people that we can like catch their interest before they figure out what's going on and they can just like look at it on its merits, like it's so clear how much better it is. Like even like as a dev trying to integrate with web 2 versus web 3 stuff, it's just so much better once you get over the initial learning curve. And so even if we stagnate in terms of the growth or we don't let it grow, I think you have like so I think the small like the one liner that we could see from a Farcaster like based world is infinitely remix the internet, because that's not really possible cross platform today in web 2. Like you can kind of like take screenshots and stuff. With Farcaster you could legitimately do the TikTok equivalent of a Stitch natively with all the different types of content that gets put onto the Farcaster protocol. And I think that could be an incredibly compelling primitive.
What does that look like, just to, flesh it out a little bit more? I kind of know what you mean by Stitch on TikTok, but frankly, I'm not a big TikTok guy myself. It's like when you take someone else's video and then like do a video on top of it or something. But like, what does that look like? Is it something that you can sort of paint a picture of based on Farcaster, what exists today, or would it require new, different apps and clients in order to sort of like even make that possible, what you're talking about?
So it 100% requires a new front end, but I think the closest comparison is like you've definitely seen some sort of TikTok where you have like six TikToks within the frame, basically. Like I think the canonical or initial version of it was like somebody started with like a sound or a beatbox or whatever, and then another person layered on, a bass line, and then somebody layers on, a drum beat, and like that kind of building the whole from like incrementally adding the sum of its parts. I think
Right.
a Twitter analog would be a collaborative quote tweet or quote cast. So instead of just having this like single quote cast interface, you have kind of like a splash of opinions on the screen. And that's why I say you got to update the front end. But you apply that idea of being able to like consume multiple perspectives on like the core nugget of content or idea. I think is something that is uniquely enabled by how Farcaster works, at least as of today. I mean, Quotecasts you can only do one, but it's not that hard to see how that could stack on top of each other with a couple FIPS getting submitted. Again,
It's what? Well, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, I was just gonna say like obviously it's a lot harder to do than it is to say, but this idea of, hey, we think crypto improves coordination, why wouldn't we explicitly do that with content?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I hadn't thought of that particular sort of idea before. And what's interesting about these social primitives or ideas is like they are usually, I mean, sometimes they could be facilitated by technology. Like I think YouTube, what they did in the early days wasn't really, it was not really possible until they were doing it
Yeah.
with like the video upload. And maybe there's certain aspects of other thing, like maybe Instagram needed the cameras on the iPhone to be of a certain quality before that was
Yeah.
feasible. I'm not really sure if that actually lines up with their timeline or not. And some of these, some of these others maybe less so. Like Snapchat doesn't. It's not sort of like the disappearing thing wasn't like a technology that came about. It might have had something to do with the camera quality or something as well. But like some of these, I think might be somewhat dependent on technological
For sure.
advancements, and certainly if we're building something that's sort of crypto dependent, then that would fit as an example. But others, what I think is interesting, like you look at something like, this isn't a social technology as much, but like Airbnb, I'm always interested in sort of these quote unquote technologies that or technology companies that are not actually like technological advancements as much as they are like conceptual advancements or like new concepts that are introduced that are just really compelling. And I think those are like as much technology as anything else. It's just not how technology is often thought of. And so what you've described here is like there's no, I mean, yes, it might be better, it might be better suited. Farcaster might be that for something like that than, something in Web 2. But like I could see, Twitter could build something with like sort of this layered quote casts or quote tweets
For
sort
sure.
of thing as well. And so from that perspective, it's more of just like a new social idea that may be quite interesting. And like, the people are going to have a ton of these ideas and most of them are not going to really pan out. And then once in a while, one does. And so this particular example, I hadn't previously thought of. And one thing that's kind of interesting about it is like, I'm sort of, after your last description, I can sort of picture what you're talking about, I think a little bit better. And if the text-based version, rather than like sort of video or images or something, like you mentioned, just a simple, like you're quote tweeting a quote tweet of a quote tweet or whatever. And it's just sort of like this layered thing versus what we're accustomed to seeing. It's more so like you can see a single tweet or, cast consider them sort of interchangeable for the sake of this example. You can see like a single cast, single tweet. You can see, a thread. You can see a single one with a number of replies. You can see a quote, single quote with a number of replies. And if you see a quote of a quote, which is, it's possible, but it doesn't look good at all. You have to click in to see like the next layered quote. Like you can't see all of it at once, and you'd have to just like keep clicking. It's kind of like horrible design for that. And so if you optimize for that particular design, it's kind of interesting because for a couple of reasons. One is that I feel like it gets to be more of a dialogue and allows for more context than currently short form text based social media allows for when it's just
Dunk
primary
architecture.
Tweet. What's that?
Dunk architecture.
Yeah, exactly. It's like less dunk architect. Well, maybe it's more, I don't know, it might be more dunks, but it's like people just, carrying forward a conversation potentially in a, maybe that's an optimistic view, but that's like one thing that it could sort of allow for. And then what I got to thinking was kind of interesting about it, almost like poetic maybe, and if it's built in a, you know, crypto context, is that it almost is like sort of symbolic of like how blockchains work. That like sort of it
Mm.
depends on how the design would work, but you know,
Yeah, I
you
get
can
what you're
imagine
saying. Yeah.
you can imagine that you know, let's say this quote tweet is already like three quotes in or something, and then two other people, you know, want to quote tweet that one, or you know, 100 other people want to quote tweet that one, but like two of them are like really compelling and really popular. Maybe they're by popular accounts or like whatever it is, or they're just good ideas. And so like those two are carried forward, and one of them has like, you know, 10,000 views, and the other one has like 15,000 views, and then there's a long tail of other ones that like sort of didn't really get picked up because they weren't like as popular as like these two versions of carrying that conversation forward. And then like people might, you know, quote on top of those, and then like, you know, maybe they have the opportunity to like sort of redeem the one that wasn't as popular and make it more popular again because the way they carried it forward is more interesting. And then the other one sort of like dies out because no one was able to take that quote to like the next level. And it's almost like you have this like a main thread that like sort of persists through this series of people quoting. And you end up with like sort of this interesting, your feed might be like sort of an interesting set of these like sort of multi-party series of quotes or multi-individual series of quotes.
Hmm.
And then also like maybe you can click on any one of those, or maybe you don't even have to, maybe multiple show up in the feed. But like maybe you can click on one of those and see like, here are some other places that like, or other derivatives from this initial, you know, from the quote before this, or from three quotes before this, or from the initial thing that started this. And like that could be just like an interesting, I mean, it's something that doesn't, to my knowledge, doesn't exist. And I think you just never know when you introduce something, a new social primitive like this, you just never really know what can happen. Like, who would have thought that? I mean, I think it would have been hard to predict at least that, um, you know, from like blogging, if you put a pretty severe constraint on the number of characters, uh, you know, and did basically microblogging like Twitter was, that that would actually be like way more popular than blogging itself. That would be something that
Yeah.
people would do, you know, every day or even every hour, or be reading all the time or whatever. And so like these seemingly, you know, hard to predict constraints can have like these really interesting results. And I think, again, having never thought of this concept before at all, the one that you describe is actually something that I would be really interested in seeing in the world. So maybe if you have any spare time on the side of Seymour, maybe you can do a light build of a client or something.
Honestly, like it's never been easier to like riff a project like this, you know, with all of the support tools that are out there. I actually brought this up to Dan like a year and a half ago, I think, because as you probably remember, the reply chains in these conversations on Farcaster used to go really, really deep. And they still do in some spots, but some of the most interesting conversations that people did involved quoting other casts that people had into the reply chain. And so what was like I think really magical about that experience is it was a lot of like interweaving different parts of Farcaster, like different pockets of conversations with each other. And
Mm.
so the like I had asked Dan for a better interface for that embedded conversation weaving, but maybe it's, you know, some ideas take time to take root and really get, you know, develop. So maybe this is time. The other thing about Farcaster, which I do think people kind of sleep on, is how fast talented builders can like ship and iterate stuff with it just because of the way it's designed. The only part of the Farcaster ecosystem that really works this way right now is the data ecosystem. But have you spent time playing around with like Farcaster user stats and the different apps like that?
Not too much. User stats, like as an app, I'm not even sure actually what that is.
So, I mean, like, you know, podcast analytics or Twitter analytics, like the things that you would expect to come with like an add-on to a social platform for that's like data focused.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen like Farcaster.in, and I've seen like some Dune dashboard metrics, but I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, all those fall into the same bucket. But
Okay.
if you there's at least 10 out there, probably more that I haven't seen in the feed, and all of them kind of hit useful parts of the Farcaster data ecosystem in different ways. And that's something that it's very hard to have that kind of, like, basically Farcaster's punching above its weight in terms of like the ability to look at Farcaster data. Now the pot of money on Farcaster for people to like pay attention to isn't that big based on the like constrained by user size and the size of the pie. But the fact that in people's spare time as side projects and some like, I think ill-fated main projects, you got a pretty robust data ecosystem or like data tool ecosystem out of Farcaster. And I think like with maybe one or two orders of magnitude more user growth, you'll be able to replicate that with social experiences like the one that we're talking about. Because like
Mm.
nothing changes in terms of data accessibility, barring some catastrophic change in Merkel's priorities. But like, if you could take the data set of TikTok or YouTube or whatever and remix it and like flip it the way that you can with Farcaster, like I think we really would bring about like a renaissance in content adjacent apps, because like people are infinitely creative and infinitely like determined, and they'll just like experiment. And so with enough trials, I think we will find really interesting stuff. To just like we're in this like messy middle part.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's gonna be interesting, and part of the I think frustration that some people have is just that there's all of this all of these cool things that sort of seem possible and like they can maybe happen in like the relative near term, but everything just seems to take a little bit longer than everyone wants. And it's, we're sort of stuck on some of these legacy platforms still. And some of the more creative ideas that we want to see aren't really coming about as fast as we'd like. So it will be fun to watch. And hopefully, regardless of what you decide to do with, with the business with Seymour in terms of dependency on Farcast or branching out to other, not being as dependent on Farcaster as well. Um, I expect that we'll both be around individually for a while, and excited to see where everything goes. But I know we're over on the scheduled time. I gotta start booking these things for longer, so that I don't keep having to apologize for everyone for going way over. But been a great conversation, and look forward to hopefully doing another one on or off the record, and being in touch on the feed. Of
Yeah, dude, it was a blast. Thanks for having me on.
course. All right. Have a good one, man.
See you, dude.